Hi guys, my name is Haley of Moth Cosplay, and today we're going to be talking about self-portrait photography. So I just wanted to go ahead and preface this by saying that I'm not a professional. I actually just recently started getting into self-portraits back in like March when I opened my Patreon, and so I just kind of wanted to share some tips and tricks and techniques, I guess, that I use, things that you might be able to work into your own cosplay lifestyle. Is it a lifestyle? I think it's just really a very, very intense hobby. So I guess today I'm just gonna go over quickly my setup and then talk about like editing and everything. So self-portrait photography is honestly a pretty easy thing to do in my opinion. I just really recommend you have at least these three basic tools. Number one is a decent camera, and it doesn't have to be like a super expensive photography camera. In fact, all of the photos that I take of myself, I take with my Google Pixel 3. It's a really, really high quality phone camera. Honestly, it's the highest quality that came out in its tier of phones, and I honestly feel like it's even going to be better than like some of the phones that are released from other brands in the next few years. I don't really know a whole lot about cell phone technology though, so who knows, I could be completely wrong. But if you are looking for a new phone and you're interested in getting something that would definitely help you with self-portraits, I would recommend the Google Pixel 3 because, like I said, it's got the high quality back camera and in fact the front camera, which I'm recording on right now. It's HD and it takes really, really good, crisp, clean photos, and it shoots in RAW. Second would be a tripod, and a tripod isn't 100% necessary. I am recording with my phone set up on one right now, but I do know people that also use things like stacks of books or shelves, and they just kind of like put their phone up there, and that's totally fine too. But if you have a tripod, especially like the one that I have, which is able to go up and down between like 20 and 70 inches, then you have a lot of variety and different things that you're able to do and more control over the position of your camera. And the third thing is actually a little remote clicker. And I just use my cell phone, so I just went to Best Buy and I picked up this Joby, J-O-B-Y clicker right here, and it is such a lifesaver. It is Bluetooth, and I honestly recommend going ahead and spending the 20 bucks on a Joby versus the $5 to $10 that you'll spend on a cheaper one that you'll find on Amazon. But the problem that I have with the $5 to $10 ones is, in my experience, they just don't last. I have got 3 of them over the course of the last few years because I really wanted to get into self-portraits a while back, and in my experience, like they just died incredibly fast. They weren't reliable. They didn't want to connect to my phone all the time, and I tried troubleshooting with like new batteries, a new clicker. Even like when I got a new cell phone, I tried it again and it just wasn't working. So go ahead and invest the extra $10. And honestly, that's basically it in terms of actual equipment. It doesn't really take up a whole lot of space. Like I said, I have my phone that I just put in my pocket and I can take it out wherever I need. I have my tripod that breaks down to be about this big around, and I put it in the corner of my room, and then my little clicker guy right here, he's the worst part. I have to try and figure out a good spot for me to like remember where he is all the time. The next thing that I guess is important to think about too is how you're going to be editing your photos. That'll also kind of determine like how you're taking them and what your big focus is. So I guess just a bit of a heads up, I edit my photos on my computer using Krita. Krita is a free program. It's basically like Photoshop, just not quite as powerful. It is lacking some of the cool tools that Photoshop has, like the background editor or better selections for like specific hues and colors, but it's pretty easy to work around those things that it's missing and still get like a really, really nice product. It's also completely possible to edit on your cell phone if you're taking photos with your phone. Photoshop, Adobe, I guess I should say, has a wide range and honestly a very incredible line of photo editing apps available for free on the Google Play Store. I'm not sure how it is for Apple. I would assume they're there as well, or if they're not, there's probably something similar. For Android, there isn't really a good, I guess you could call it, digital art app that I've found. I've been looking for a little bit kind of on and off here and there, not super intense since I am, once again, editing on my desktop. But for iPhone, there is a digital art app that I actually used a lot and I loved. And if there was anything that I would change about like the Android store and my phone specifically, it would be to bring the app to Android's Google Play Store. So the app that I'm talking about is Art Studio, and it is for free. There's Art Studio Lite last I saw on the Apple Store, and then if you pay, I think it's like $2, you get the full version, and the whole thing is honestly incredible. It is really, really great for editing photos and even for doing quick little blueprints for your cosplay props, but that's like a whole different conversation. But just, you know, there's all sorts of options. So if you either don't have a computer or a laptop, or you just prefer not to work with one, you can always edit on your phone. All that aside though, I think I'm gonna start talking a little bit more about like how I specifically take my photos. And this is going to be just about what I do. What different people do will completely depend on them and their preferences and what they're going for. I do a lot of post-production in my photos, so I do things differently than somebody who, like one of my best friends, the Nerdy Monkey, my girl Kenny, focuses a lot more on light editing and just fixing sort of light issues or small blemishes or things like that. I'm gonna go ahead and switch my camera into portrait mode. I tend to take my photos with my camera oriented in portrait versus horizontal, and I'll explain a little bit more why, but I'm just gonna go ahead and move over there. We're just gonna go. Okay, so we are in my dining room, flat blank wall, which if you're somebody like me who does a lot of post-processing, this will be really, really handy. And then there's me. So the big thing that I'm really gonna talk about is, I guess, posing. The big thing that I really recommend is finding some sort of mirror, whether it's a full body or it's just a small sort of bathroom mirror, and just pose. Like, just think about what your character is or what you're trying to embody, and think about the best way to kind of go about that. So for example, let's say the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland. Not the Queen of Hearts, the Red Queen. There is a giant difference. The Red Queen is a very, very elegant, but also very sort of in-your-face kind of personality. She tends to think very highly of herself and carries herself in such a way. So if I were to be posing for her, I would maybe pump my chest out a little bit, and I would try and take up a lot of space and keep my hands really light and airy. And if I were doing a character like my Crusader from Diablo, I would still sort of try and take up a lot of space, but instead of trying to be very light and delicate and kind of look down my nose at you and like, I take my back, I like sit back and I put the weight on the front foot, and I kind of twist my body and I look up a little bit more. I feel like looking up gives a bit more of like an angry sort of expression on my face. But things like that, like Widowmaker, for example, she's very, very elegant and graceful, but she's also very, very, like, her silhouette is very particular and she's very thin. So I would say, like, keep your arms in, and maybe because she's a very sensual character, touch your face, touch your parts of your body, be sensual, be seductive, things like that. It's really hard to describe. Once you sort of pin down the character you're going for and the look, I find that it's much easier to get into the poses and figure things out. And of course, if you're working with a photographer, they'll direct you more, but if you're working on your own, you have to kind of figure it out. So do that by yourself without the outfit on, and then once you get suited up, before you even turn the camera on, go back in front of the mirror and do the same thing. You know, pose, sort of like figure out the kind of thing you're going for. What are you doing with yourself? How would your character act? What's going to be going on? Like, maybe she's reacting to a fight. Maybe she's going to like get ready for one. It's just, you have to sort of embody this sort of thing. Now that I've discussed posing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about camera angle, because once you have the pose down, the other important thing is camera angle. I tend to shoot in portrait. I do a lot of post-production. So for me, the composition of me in the frame isn't as important as making sure that I'm in the frame in its entirety, in the portion that I want to be working with myself, and that the image is clear. And you're probably wondering, well, what do you mean? So if I take a photo like this, and I want to just work from the waist up, you're going to be able to get a lot more detail than if I were to take my camera like this, and then still try and come back here to get me from the waist up. So that's why I orient myself in portrait. If there's any like weird thing that I'm trying to get, like maybe I want to get my arm stretched out with like a staff in it or something, I think I did that for Sally Whitemane, then of course I would go horizontal, but once again, for the most part, I tend to do portrait. Another important thing is the angle of your camera and where it's shooting from. So right now, my camera is basically at eye level with me. That is a really, really neutral shooting point. If you are portraying a character that's sort of like bold and in charge and you want it to look intimidating and strong, then I always think that shooting from a lower angle pointed up will give you that sort of look. It makes you look taller and more intimidating. It's part of why a lot of people tend to think that I am much taller than I am, because I take a lot of photos at that angle when I'm posting work in progress photos, because it makes me look really cool and strong and intimidating. And I'm not. I am 5'3" and 110 pounds. Like, it's so, but to give you an example, so this is me right now. I'm just gonna like stand here neutrally. This is a good neutral sort of camera angle, and I'm going to go ahead and drop the camera angle some. And there you go. So it's a very, very subtle difference, but it has me looking a bit more down my nose at you, which gives sort of a more intimidating and like air of superiority to your photos. And you can also see that it changes the proportions a little bit as well. And the same thing sort of works for the opposite, for going up and looking down, which you would mostly want to do for characters that are maybe a little bit more meek and shy and maybe innocent is a good, or a child. If you want to make yourself look small and tiny, that's a really great angle to do. And then this is this result. So as you can see, it's such a small sort of change, raising it up or lowering it and then changing the angle ever so slightly, but it definitely affects the way that things are presented in your photos and the way that your poses will be interpreted. It's also really good for like, this is like MySpace angle, some people call it. I mean, I don't really think so. I think this is a very, very nice angle. It's really pretty. And in fact, a lot of the times when I record my YouTube videos, I tend to have the angle a bit more like this than I do nude. But moving along from that, I'm gonna keep it here for a little bit. Always talk about lighting. So lighting is incredibly important whenever you're doing really any sort of photos, whether it's portraits of others or of yourself or of your cat or whatever the heck you want to take a photo of. It's incredibly important. So for me personally, I like to have even lighting from at least 2 different angles, typically the front and then at least one side. Depending on the mood I'm going for, I might shift one of them to the other side to give me even on both. Right now, actually, I have my dining room light on, and I've been thinking about turning that off because I do look a little washed out right now. I'm gonna do that real quick, give me 1 second. And there you go, you can see I have really, really nice lighting coming from this angle and then also straight in front of me from 2 windows. You can shoot either through windows or you can use artificial lighting. It depends on your preferences. I personally like using artificial lighting because sometimes I'm taking photos in the middle of the night. Quite often I'm taking photos in the middle of the night and I can't let light in from the windows because there is no light outside. There are some important but very basic things about lighting to know, which is basically like the angle and the kind of light. Right now, this light is very, very blue. It tends to make me look really, really pale. When I had the dining room light on earlier, it was a lot more orange, but kind of brightened and livened me up. You can work with really any sort of lighting. It's also very important though to do some white balancing, and sometimes you might end up having to just do that in post. I tend to shoot with cooler light because I like looking like a ghost. And there's always all sorts of really cool stuff that you can do with like gel lights and flashes and speed lights, and that I don't really know a whole lot about. I would love to know more about it, but right now it's not really my focus. So that being said, I guess we're gonna go upstairs and I'm gonna show you my janky little setup for now. Okay, so we are back in regular camera mode, recording myself, and welcome to my creepy attic. Yay, this is only a tiny portion of it. Part of it came finished, so I turned this into my own little photo studio, and there really isn't a whole lot to this. So let me go ahead and turn this camera around so you can see sort of how large the studio is, quote unquote studio. So this studio is only, I'd say maybe 9 feet by 9 feet. This is a vinyl backdrop. I recommend getting vinyl because they tend to be less prone to wrinkling. This one is wrinkled because it got wrinkled while we're moving, and I put it up here, folded like this to helpfully let it kind of like smooth out. It's worked a little bit over here, but you know, that happens. I have a backdrop stand, which you can get off of Amazon for about $20. They're fairly cheap and they are adjustable. You change the heights, change the width, change all sorts of stuff. This vinyl backdrop was also $30, and I have 3 soft boxes. Those were also about 30 bucks a pop. A lot of this was sort of accumulated over time. The stand in one of my lights was actually a Christmas gift from a friend, and then I spent 60 for those 2 and then 30 for that. And it does add up, but since I am doing this for Patreon, hello, it's just kind of an investment for me. It's 100% not necessary, but it does make things a little bit easier to do and give you a bit more control. If you're wondering why these 2 lights are pointed towards the walls, it's because they're incredibly strong, and having them pointed towards the walls allows the walls to sort of act as bounces, which means the light bounces off of the wall and comes back, and it's a little bit less harsh and not as direct. It just helps, once again, create that nice even lighting on all sides. And then I have this one guy who is very far away. He's back past the doorway, in fact, who I can turn on and have good front light without it being super dramatic. And then I also have a mirror right here. This is actually a new addition. It was downstairs, but I brought it up here because we replaced this old mirror with a newer one that looks better. And this guy just is here so I can see what kind of pose I'm doing. And if I think it'll look dumb, I can adjust and do something different. It's really, really handy, but once again, not completely necessary because you can always shoot on the front-facing camera, hi Delilah, which also allows you to do the same thing. So that's basically it for the actual taking of the photos. And I guess now I'm going to discuss editing by inserting a small clip and talking over what I did to a Mothra photo. So this won't be so much about how to edit all of your cosplay photos as much as it's going to be sort of a demo for Krita, that program that I was telling you about. I use this for editing all of my photos. It's really, really simple and intuitive, and it's just easy for me to use, and it's completely free, which is the best part. I photographed myself in two separate sections, my top and bottom, because I was only working with a 3-foot kiddie pool, so I knew there was going to be a lot of post-production. And originally I was thinking about having the background really, really flat and just purple with the flowers in there, but you'll see later on as I start adjusting, it sort of gets this really, really neat watercolor effect. It's very beautiful. I'm incredibly happy with how these photos turned out. I had to splice in my leg and different parts of the dress and my hair and the flowers in the background, and a lot of this couldn't have been done without masks. And there are a couple of different kinds of masks, though I mainly work with filter masks and transparency masks. A transparency mask allows you to remove and add different parts of your photo to the background without damaging or destroying the photo that you're working with, if that makes sense. And a filter mask sort of works the same way in the sense that it is a mask that applies the filter all over the image, and then you can use the mask to remove or add the filter where you need it. But with the filter masks, it makes it incredibly easy to sort of change how much of the filter is applied and where it's applied and exactly what in the world is going on with it. A lot of this sort of post-production really just comes to like fiddling with things, and things like just figuring out where you want things to be placed, and sometimes you're going to remove things just to add them back 15 minutes later, or add things just to remove them or never even encounter them or use the layer. So right now you can see there's a couple of different pieces of the background that I'm trying to get all to put together, and you'll actually see in a second where I'm messing with some filter layers to try and get everything to match up perfectly. I also think it's very important to not worry too much about all of the tiny little details. Just get the sort of general idea and spend time on the things that you're really focusing on. But for example, the stem of this flower, I spent quite a bit of time trying to get it perfect. And then once I finally finished it, I zoomed out and I was like, this looks no different than what it did before I started any of this. And sometimes that happens, so just never be afraid to zoom out and look at the entire image before wasting a lot of time. I think it's also really important too, because there have been times where I thought that I fixed an issue with something only to zoom out and realize that I made it so much worse. So right now I'm just messing with adding filter layers to everything to make all of the background pieces match. And then I'm going back and I'm actually erasing the filter masks off of the flowers to brighten them back up. I really wanted my flowers to pop, and darkening the background but highlighting the flowers was a wonderful way to do that. The nice thing is that they don't really compete with me. I'm still the center focus of the photo. And then to really help make me pop, I went back in and added even more shadows with a light airbrush tool beneath where I was. And now I'm just kind of messing with my own colors, making sure that my own skin matches itself and that everything looks really nice. And then finally I end up with a really nice, pretty finished image. Big shout out to all of my patrons. You guys are all amazing, but an especially big shout out to Gage the Necromancer, Amatiran, Robin Matthews, CJ Rose Cosplay, Joshua Cripps, Nicole Wilson, and Things Shall Get Loud Now.